Hi guys, and welcome back to the basics of programming. We're nearly at the end. This is episode 8, so you've just got a few more to go. And we are going to cover something called iteration today. So what actually is iteration? I should probably have my Python up. So iteration is repeating something over and over again. And we do this using something called loops. So there's a couple of different types of loops, and the first one we're going to talk about is a while loop, and they depend on a statement. So something has to be true for the code to run, and the code will continue to run until that case is no longer true. So I'm going to do an example. So we're going to have a variable, and we're going to call it I. And the reason I'm going to call it I is because I is short for index. So often when we do loops or refer to something called lists, which we'll cover in another episode, we use our counter as I. So we're going to have I equals 0 because we're going to increase that later on. What we're going to say is while, and you'll notice it changed colour because it's a keyword. While I is less than 10, and then all of the code underneath this is going to run while I is less than 10. So right now I is less than 10, 0. And what we're going to do is print iteration, did not want to put that, comma, I. And then we're going to do I plus equals 1. Now plus equals is another way of saying I equals I plus 1. It just shortens things down. So what's going to happen here is I is currently 0. So while I is less than 10, it's going to print iteration and then whatever number I is. So at the moment I is 0, so it will print iteration 0. So then I'm going to add 1 to I, so I now becomes 1. 1 is still less than 10, so it will print iteration 1 and add another 1, 2. 2 is still less than 10, so it will print iteration 2. That kind of thing. Now, the question is, how far do you think this is going to go up? So what number do you think will be the last number printed? I'll give you a moment to think about that because you could be wrong. Okay, so I'm going to save and run that. So it goes up to 9 because 10 is not less than 10. So it will never print 10. 9 is less than 10, but as soon as it gets to 10, it won't run this code. Now, this ran 10 times because I equals 0. If I equals 1, this would only have run 9 times. Hence, it's 0 and not 1. Hopefully that made sense. You will get used to this whole starting at 0 rather than 1 thing later on. So that can be used when you don't know how many times you need to use a loop. The condition doesn't have to be like I is less than a number. It could be while I is true. And then at some point you could change I to false. That kind of thing. You have to be careful that the loop doesn't go on forever. You can quite easily get stuck in something called an infinite loop, which is where, so if instead I change this to I equals -1, I is never going to get to 10, is it? So this goes on forever. Which isn't good because then you have to kill it. So we don't want that. You always want to be able to stop it because at some point you'll run out of memory and your computer will basically freak out. So the next type of loop is a for loop, and these are really useful for when you know how many iterations you want to happen. So when we wrote this, we knew that we wanted 10 iterations, so we could have just used a for loop. So the way you do this is you have for, which changes the colour, and we're going to call our thing I, like we did before, and then you do something called in range, and then because I wanted 10 iterations, I'm going to put 10 there. So what this means is for I equals 0 until I is 10, this code is going to run. And we're going to put iteration, oh, that needs to be in speech marks. And then I. So this will do the exact same thing as before. Just like that. So do have a play around with those. it will make more sense when you get onto some bigger stuff, why they're used in different ways. These can be really useful for something called lists, and we will come on to that in episode 10. But now that you understand iteration, please do have a go at some more of the challenges. Remember that you do need lots of practice in order to become a really good programmer. So next time we're going to cover procedures and functions, which are actually really, really cool and are very, very useful. But that's it for today. Thanks for joining me.